Mini episode 1331 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Before we turn more to some of the Biden stuff, last thing I got to say about Trump is, and again, and this is one of these things where a lot of folks on the left, I think some of them willingly miss the point on this, some of them unwillingly miss the point, but this is a thing where, and I say this as a guy that 25 years ago, coming from a Rust Belt city, said the Republican Party, for its future survival, needs to be more blue collar, needs to be less yacht club, everything like that. Some of the things that Trump brought, and yes, there were some crude ways that he brought this about, but also Trump was, in my lights, much better on trade than your average Republican president. I think he went past fair trade into protectionism, and I'm a fair trader, but he wasn't a free trader. Now, I don't think you should be protectionist, but I don't think you should be a pure free trader either. Trump oriented the Republican Party away from that. Permanently, probably not, but he did. Again, realism in foreign policy, especially in the Middle East, a good thing, as opposed to the neocons. So there are parts of Trump's brand that I have long said the Republican Party needs to be more in favor. Again, as a guy who was a Buchanan guy back in the 90s. Right. And he took a lot of these things and went with it. So we have a tendency to look at the demagoguery that won over blue-collar workers and whatever. But there were many ways that he reoriented the Republican Party that, from my estimation, were for the better. And that's the whole thing of how you sort out the post-Trump era in the Republican Party, which I do think we're into. I think it is going to be a post-Trump era, and I think it's a thing of separating the good from the bad is incredibly, incredibly nuanced, and our political system is not set up to deal with nuanced arguments.
That's true fact. Although when you say working class, you do always have to append it with white working class, because despite his pickup, particularly among Black and Hispanic men, the working class people who are not white still voted overwhelmingly for Biden.
True.
So, and I think if you don't, I think it distorts, to think of it purely in class terms, it distorts it, right? Because I don't think you can separate race from Donald Trump.
No, you can't.
I really don't. You go all the way back to birtherism. You go all the way back to the Central Park Five.
Well, and see, but here's the thing, though, and this is where I think, and again, I mean, it astonishes me that he came as close as he did to winning, notwithstanding all the ways that he shot himself in the foot. And I think, first of all, had he taken the pandemic seriously at all, he'd have won. Because
I think he might be right. I think he may well be right.
Yes, because he didn't take it seriously at all, and it hurt him and as I said previously on the show, based purely on the policy areas I liked. I stayed open to voting for him until I'd say May. And then at that point, I was so turned off by the pandemic stuff, I said, screw it, I'm voting third party. I voted Joe Jurgensen, # I'm with her. So that was, what I ended up doing. Most people probably just went right over to Biden because everybody thinks we live in a binary world where you got to do one or the other, But it's a thing where, in looking at this, it's a thing with Trump of where, there is an incredible amount of nuance of what happens from here on in, and where had he embraced the fact that he signed the prison reform deal on there, because I agree with you, he was trying to pander to racial resentments throughout the campaign here, and that's a thing of where you're then making an overt appeal for minority votes on a principled basis. You're talking about a public policy issue that disproportionately affects their community. That's another. I mean, if he wins even more minority votes, does that swing him the election? Not in and of itself, and not nearly as much as taking the pandemic seriously would have. But these are things where, again, his own stubbornness, his own ego, his own toxicity, as far as thinking he knew the answer to everything like that, got in the way, because he thought running as Archie Bunker was the way to do it, and that ain't the way to do it in 2020 America.
Somebody did remind me that on a panel in the summer, a campaigns and elections event, I always like to throw out a forward-looking question when I'm moderating panels, and I asked for people's predictions, and I predicted that in January, Kamala Harris would break the tie in the Senate. Mm-hmm. Now, when you and I talked, even just a couple of months later, and that was before Kamala had been nominated,
right?
But when you and I talked a couple of months later, you and I thought the Democrats were going to do far better than I did even over the summer.
Sure.
And I think that it is difficult to overstate the way that the fact that Trump could mobilize a lot of people who no one else could mobilize, and I wonder if the a normal, quote unquote, normal Republican candidate will be able to do that. I think Trump's, expanded the electorate in directions that other candidates simply couldn't.
That is very possible, based on the whole makeup, the unique makeup of his nature. And again, and listen, and I will say too that I'm sure that there's a Trump supporter that would come back at me and take issue with my critique, because in light of the riots over the summer and everything that happened, the damage in all these cities. I mean, you go to downtown Cleveland and it still looks like Hiroshima in areas of there, as far as in so many of the major cities. The amount of stuff.
DC and New York, no.
Well,
DC and New York doesn't look like anything ever happened.
Well, okay, but it took a period of time, I'm sure, to get back from where
Not
they
really,
were.
No.
Well, I don't know.
Not in DC.
Really? Okay. All right. That was
not a problem.
I mean,
grossly overplayed.
All right.
Media,
well, I mean,
particularly
and that's
conservative media, at least here.
Well, I mean, across the country, there was the one weekend in particular. I think it was the weekend after Memorial Day. I will tell you this: that I mean, rarely could you find any effort or any mirth in any of the things that were happening. But the one thing of the guy who, I don't know if you ever saw this. This was, I think, in Salt Lake City. Did you hear about the story of bow and arrow guy?
No. I think I heard somebody refer to it, but I don't know what it was.
Here's what it is. Go look it up on YouTube, everybody. That there were some protesters that shut down a highway, and again, look, I understand that that's annoying as hell. I sure as hell don't think that's the right way to go about stuff, whatever. But this guy, what he decided to do was he went, and he was being filmed because he was confronting them, and somebody had a car phone on him, and what happened at that point was somebody went and, you hear somebody yell, "He's getting out a bow and arrow." And what happened was he went into his car, he got a bow and arrow out, he fired like one or two shots that didn't hit anybody, and then the crowd descended and beat the crap out of him. So, I mean, it was just one of those things like, that was not a good move, buddy. That was not a good way to handle that.
Yeah. Tragedy turns to farce.
Well, yes. And that was, and things were, as somebody who was on Twitter that entire evening, just going back and forth, looking at everything happening in every major city. I mean, look, it felt to me like the world was spinning off its axis, and I think probably Trump did.
I mean, even in Portland, you're talking about 4 or 5 blocks.
Well,
right? My friends who live in Portland were mildly inconvenienced.
Well, it's interesting that, one of my good friends lives in Portland, and he's the city itself. It's not necessarily downtown, but it's probably not far from that. And I hardly ever hear him refer to coming up against any of this stuff. And I know Portland's not the biggest area, so that's something that's had me scratching my head, because clearly stuff's been going on the whole time.
Well, I mean, and in Portland, you've got, I mean, this is building on a couple of decades. It's like, I think Portland is an outlier case.
Well,
I live in D.C.
Right. Well,
it was not a big deal.
Okay. Well,
right? They were, the worst damage was done the first night of the protests, and it had nothing to do with the protests.
Well,
it was gangs of criminals taking advantage of the police's attention being drawn away.
Right.
The windows, the shops were being broken into like 3 miles from the protest.
Right.
So anyway,
but here's the thing, though. But this actually ties into what we're talking about with the here and now, though, and the next 4 years, because the whole thing of, there's been commentary after the election, and I think it's right on the money, because you look at cities like Minneapolis, waving their fist, defund the police. That is absolutely, that's the reason Trump, notwithstanding the fact that he didn't win, he actually had coattails, and that's a reason why. And that's a thing where a lot of Democrats after the election have said this, as far as the framing of stuff. And again, I think there's a decent amount of backlash that was out there as far as the way that everything went.
Can I point something out?
Sure.
Yeah. The media and the conservative media and the politicians who were promoting this idea that the Democrats were for defunding the police were lying.
Some of them were.
Right?
Some of them were.
No, I mean, virtually no Democratic elected official, virtually no Democratic candidate was talking about that.
Colin, Minneapolis abolished the police.
They did not abolish. They renamed things. There are still police with guns walking the streets of Minneapolis.
I'll take your word for it. I haven't been there.
That is just ludicrous.
I'll take your word for it. Well,
yeah.
Wait a minute. Why do you need?
It's
I'm sorry.
Like Joe Biden is. If you looked at like Venezuelan and Colombian and Cuban communities in Florida, you had especially a lot of older people didn't vote for Joe Biden because they were afraid of socialism. Joe Biden is not socialism. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is not socialist. Really, she's not talking about government control of the means of production. Those were
anyways,
lies. LIES, lies.
Well, but you and I have both said, and and the last time I think this was the last time we were on. You were splitting a difference that I got to be honest with you, I don't see, and a lot of people don't see, because it's a circle back to that. When I said that Joe Biden has proudly talked of running on the most progressive platform ever, and yet you don't, I think you and I both agree, you're happy about this, I'm not, that the gravitational pull of the Democratic Party is very much leftward, especially compared to the Obama years. The tide is pulling far in that.
On a scale of 1 to 100, we moved about 5 points.
Okay, all right, but that's good. But I mean, I remember.
Barely left.
I remember your complaints of the Obama years, and this is a thing where so you're saying that somebody can have the most progressive platform of all time. And one that AOC would gladly sign off on, as she has, and she describes herself as a democratic socialist, and you're saying don't connect those dots there. A lot of us, myself included, do.
A democratic socialist is not a socialist.
I get that it's...
The problem is that we don't have enough words for these things, and that people on the left make inartful decisions about what they call themselves. Bernie Sanders is not a socialist. He's a social democrat, right?
Well, okay.
Denmark is not a socialist country. Norway is not a socialist country. They are capitalist countries with robust social safety nets.
Well,
Elizabeth Warren calls herself a capitalist, right?
No, she does. She does. Bernie Sanders doesn't. Here's the thing, though, and this is what I love about these discussions, because I defy anybody to find any other show that's going to take on something like this. I've heard Bernie Sanders, and this is, there's any number of crotchety things. And by the way, who knew that his meme was going to be, the big hit
I know,
of
right?
the
inauguration?
The
one with him at Yalta.
Well, I immediately jumped on the bandwagon subsequently of Bernie memes, but me being from where I'm from, I was substituting in Bernie Kosar standing in the pocket. So that was how I... But as he is my hero. But as far as it goes, Bernie gave one of these crotchety old man, interviews, or this was from back in. I mean, Bernie was a crotchety young man, right? Like back in the 70s.
Sure. Yeah.
And,
no, he was born 80 years old.
Yes. And like somewhere along the way, when he was on a public access show or something up there in Vermont, it was like. It was something, and I'm paraphrasing him, like, what do we need 15 different kinds of mouthwash for? What do we... I'm like, you want to tell me that guy's not a central planner at heart? I mean, that's America, man. Like, I knew a guy...
No, I'm not in his heart.
Okay, but like, that's entirely opposite the spirit of... When I was a young intern...
So wait a minute. So Bernie Sanders' central planning is bad, but the monopolistic social planning of 5 energy companies is good.
And big tech. Big tech is its own, quasi monopoly.
I mean, come on, man.
No,
there hasn't been a free market in this country basically ever.
And that I agree.
Whether it's government regulated or not, you get a monopolistic power and oligopolistic power almost immediately.
Well, I agree with that, but that's a thing where you have to wonder, okay, who's going to benefit on what I'm about to bring up next here? The one thing, as we circle around here to the consequences, I would say, of a lot of the Biden actions, and it's been a flurry of executive orders here in the early days, probably the most consequential of which, I would say, was shutting down the Keystone Pipeline, which you're already seeing gas prices starting to pipe up a little bit here in this country. And that's the thing here, this whole notion of we're going to try and get ourselves off fossil fuels tomorrow, that is going to be a thing.
Not tomorrow. Again, that is not his plan.
Well,
no, it is not his plan. And Keystone XL Pipeline had plenty of problems. Plenty of regulatory problems.
Well, and look,
it had some federal approval, but there were state courts still holding it up, and there were state regulatory barriers to it, too.
Colin, that's symbolism at its finest, because you want to shut down the oil sands, you can't do it. It's in another country. They're a sovereign country. We are not going to stop Canada from doing one effing thing. What we're going to do is we're going to stop it from coming into this country and easing our own energy situation and whatever. To me, that's symbolism at its finest. Canada's like, okay, we'll just put it on rail cars then. I mean, we don't...
But far less efficiently, and you're not going to be able to pull nearly as much out of the ground. And Canada's going to have to change course in a few years anyway. In the meantime, let's not emit a few megatons of carbon. I think that's okay.
It's a thing.
I don't. If you want to dig a coal mine in your backyard, I don't have to let you carry the coal across my backyard.
Okay, but I mean, at a time when the Fed's already doing the helicopter money thing, we're already printing money like it's 1929 in Germany and all these things.
But it's not 1929 in Germany.
But I mean,
the inflation rate is under. Isn't it under 1% right now?
Lies, damn lies, and statistics. For anybody that's been buying food is exempted from it. I believe. Isn't food and fuel exempted from it? And those are areas.
No, there's the core versus. It depends on how you like it. There's core inflation versus the inflation, the volatile.
Right, and that's a thing where you put higher gas prices on top of all of this. And I think when you're looking at the scenario for Biden and the Democrats in the 2022 midterms, their number one thing that they got to be hoping for, although I don't think they have the self-awareness to know about it, because they're with the Keystone actions and everything else that's anti-oil, they're feeding into it. Gas prices going up. That is something that could both hurt the economy.
Why are gas prices going to go up? I mean, oil prices are up a little. Trust me, my parents have mineral rights.
Okay.
about 10 miles away from where I'm sitting, right?
Okay.
And they haven't, they're not getting checks like they used to.
Right.
We watch the oil prices here. Yeah, they've ticked up a little bit, but I think you're going to, at a point where fracking has not just affected gas production, but also, increased America's oil production dramatically.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still pretty darn close to functionally oil independent. When we import oil, it's usually because it's like a particular weight of oil, a particular flavor of oil that is better to refine into certain things. But nobody's running short of gasoline.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, but I mean, if you're looking at the trajectory, again, we're about a month into the Biden era here, so this is a thing where certainly if gas prices,
I would be very wary of making. I mean, the energy and the oil and gas industry is, no pun intended, highly volatile, and it depends on way more short-term factors than anything Joe Biden's going to do. Let's just put it that way.
Well, so that is definitely something to keep an eye on. I know that the White House press secretary there, or spokeswoman, Jen Psaki, had said recently here that they more or less intend to S-can, I think, the entirety of Trump foreign policy. So I don't know. Does that mean a return to the permanent wars?
I don't know what that means.
Well, I mean, she basically said we're getting away from all of that. So, I mean, again, baby and bathwater,
well, they're
right?
reviewing all of it.
Well,
I think his China policy is not going to change nearly as much as a lot of people might think.
Well, it better not, because
we've got 2 aircraft carriers doing joint exercises in the South China Sea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So he's not back, they're doing the freedom of the freedom of navigation operations, right?
Right.
They're not backing away from things like that. I mean, Trump wouldn't talk to Xi about the Uyghurs.
Right.
He probably kind of liked what he's doing.
Yeah, and I get that. And Trump was soft on Hong Kong, but then, I don't know. I mean, is it going to be, saber rattling towards Russia, a nuclear power in their own right? So, I mean, all of this stuff here, too. A return to the permanent wars of the Middle East. I mean, Biden's the same guy that voted for the Iraq War and all the other stuff here. So, I mean...
Yep, he did.
That's
absolutely true.
When you're talking about getting away...
I don't know what happens with Afghanistan. I don't know if anyone has an answer to Afghanistan.
Yeah.
The Afghan government certainly doesn't.
Right, but I do think drawing down as much as humanly possible and as quick as humanly possible, that's an option that I like. So, but we'll have to see if that happens. I am not holding my breath on that one here, because when I hear return to normalcy, that could be a return towards more saber rattling and some of the kind of stuff that basically predated on all this.
I just don't think that's Biden's style.
Well, part of it's who you got working for you too, though, and that's the whole thing.
Yeah. But I mean, my God, Blinken is about as deadpan a Secretary of State as you're going to get.
True.
You're not going to get these loose cannon effects like you did with Trump's people.
Well, what's interesting is a little bit of continuity from Trump that was not a good thing in my estimation. We have now another Secretary of Defense who needed a waiver to serve in the position, as he was not coming in as a lifelong civilian. Another guy with those kind of ties to the military-industrial complex. So, it checked off a box here on the diversity thing, but at what cost is what I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm actually a little more sanguine about that. But my God, you want to talk about the military, we talk all day.
Sure. About
the almost imperial retinues that, like, these generals have, right?
Yes.
And the cushy gigs that are waiting for them. I forget I haven't seen the numbers in a long time, but we used to have like 10 times more admirals and generals than we did during World War II with a military that is a fraction, a small fraction of the size.
Right.
So to me, the bloat starts at the top.
Yeah.
I'm going to give him Austin the benefit of the doubt, and let's see.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he's going to be going off without doing things without Biden's approval. Now, is he going to get some of these ridiculous, what I'm going to be looking at, honestly, is procurement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, the Navy's shipbuilding program has been one disaster after another.
Right.
The Zumwalt cruisers, the Littoral Combat Ship, the Ford aircraft carrier, just disastrous, bloated, poorly thought out, stupid decisions.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be watching the kind of decisions they have started to make a few smarter ones. I think buying new F-15s to replace the old F-15s is actually going to save a ton of money down the road.
Sure.
But so that's the kind of thing I'm going to be watching.
Yeah, I mean, buy smarter, definitely, when you have to. And it's a thing, too, where when you look at this, it's very, very interesting for those of us that remember 2009 and 2010 that Joe Recovery Summer Biden appears to be putting so much of his marbles on this stimulus package in the early going here, that this is going to be sort of the, and no pun intended in light of previous mentions here, keystone thing of his presidency in the first 2 years. Is absolutely zero pun intended. But as far as the different things that are going to be in there and not be in there, the funny thing is that as far as the potential for this, and this is what I said, by the way, to folks who were sweating about a Democrat. There's a lot of folks on my side that were sweating about a Democrat-controlled Senate if it's 50-50. And the same guy that helps me sleep a little bit better at night is the same guy causing heartburn for so many of y'all, and that would be good old Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Also, for what it's worth, Kristen Sinema from Arizona. I've just seen a piece on her where she's essentially like the Joe Manchin that doesn't get attention like he does. So as long as you have them in there to be, I would say, I know these are not the words you'd use, the adults in the room. I'm a little bit sanguine about what's going to make it into the package here, what's not, and everything. And I'm sure I'm not going to like everything that comes through this here. I don't deny that the economy still needs more stimulus in light of what the government did over the last year to shut things down as much as they did. And again, unlike a lot of people on the right, I don't whine about that because public health has to be taken into account. And until we get out of this thing, which thankfully, it feels like we're in the bottom of the seventh inning right now. I hope I'm right.
I hope so too.
Yeah, I think so.
This has been a tedious, painful time.
Well, and as long as it doesn't become a 21-inning game in that analogy, but having them in there. Joe Manchin, Kristen Sinema are maybe two of the five most powerful people in Washington right now, I think.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see too. I think Manchin's going to be the biggest thing with Sinema and Manchin is probably going to be the minimum wage increase.
Yes.
And I live in D.C. where the last stage of the minimum wage increase is getting phased in this summer. And I have friends who are small business owners who, like cafe owners, things like that, who are complaining about it. But it hasn't caused mass unemployment in D.C. Let's put it that way.
Colin, quick side question: Is there a single Mickey D's left in that city where people aren't ordering off a touch screen?
I don't know. I haven't been to McDonald's in too long.
Okay.
I have a craving for McDonald's cheeseburger every couple of years, and then I eat one, and then I remember why I don't eat those.
Oh, that's why. That's awesome.
We do have a Popeyes in my neighborhood.
Nice.
So we're doing good on that front.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so I think the minimum wage and that kind of thing, but the things that they're going to be, I suspect are going to hold the line on are, the funding for state and local governments, people who have to balance a budget, people who can't run a debt.
Right.
And then the individual bailouts, if they fiddle with the details, it'll be in, the amount of phase out at different income levels and things like that.
Right.
But, Bernie Sanders had a really good point on the politics of, the income restrictions on the stimulus, that after running, especially in the Georgia runoffs, after running on this notion of a $2,000 total, package, that it would be insane for Democrats, for people who got stimulus money under Trump to not get it under Biden.
Yeah.
Like from a purely political point of view, this is just stupid.
I understand that.
And I think that again, Manchin and Sinema will fiddle around the edges, and the minimum wage increase is probably one of those. But let's just see what happens. Biden made a point in his town hall on CNN last night that if the minimum wage had been tied to inflation, it'd be $20 an hour now.
Yeah, true. But by the way, on the point with Bernie Sanders, while I can't argue with a certain type of logic he was using there, I'm not sure what universe we're living in here now where Bernie Sanders is arguing against means testing and I'm arguing for it. But I would say the first two.
I hear what you're saying. It's just he was making more of a hard-boiled political argument than you expect from Bernie Sanders.
I understand that, but wherever the cutoff is, and I'm one of these people where, and I'm sympathetic to the whole thing of, like, as somebody who lived briefly in D.C. for a couple months some years ago, knowing the insane cost of living there, whether it be the Bay Area, New York, whatever, I get that. So something that I might not consider middle income where I'm at, like 250,000, maybe in some areas it might be. I don't know where we set the cap. Let's just go hog wild and say 500,000. Should anybody above half?
They're going to set it 150,000.
Okay, but I mean, here's my point though. The fact that we sent it, I think, to everybody on the first one, should we have ever sent it to anybody above, let's say, 500,000 in the first place? Just because we were stupid then doesn't mean we should be stupid now. You know what I'm saying?
Well, yeah, and again, I think you're going to get the cap that the thing that they're talking about now. That seems to be the consensus is $75,000 for individuals, and again, that's adjusted gross income. So that's going to be anyone making up to about $90,000 realistically, right?
Sure, and the whole thing of and I always hate the whole type thing of faux selflessness of like a Warren Buffett of like, well, taxes should be higher for people like me. I'm going to volunteer everybody to pay higher taxes. That whole kind of a thing. But I'm willing to say Warren Buffett shouldn't have gotten his 1200 and his 600 at that time there, okay? Just because I don't agree with him on the whole throwing everybody else under the bus who doesn't earn as much as him. And I think, again, he's a classic example of how the wealthy use government to kind of quash their potential competition. Let's keep small businesses small. But I guess that's another rant for another day. But I do say that Warren Buffett shouldn't have gotten his cake on that one there, nor should a lot of these other folks. So Bernie Sanders might be right on that, but being dumb then is not a reason to be dumb now.
Well, I would just argue that the number of people who make over $500,000 pretty small.
It is.
So the number of people that you're mad about getting that is not too big. The bigger point is that the stimulus money is going to go out to a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
A couple of 100 million people who will spend it right away. And that's, it's not just about helping people. It's also about juicing demand at a time when demand is low. It's classic Keynesianism that way.
Although people saved a lot of it last time.
I'll give you a stat.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this isn't something that's relevant right now, but if you want to create one job, you have to spend like $600,000 or $800,000 on highway construction, right, to create one job. If you spend $30,000 on arts education, on the arts, you create one job, right?
Right.
So there are, and if the whole point is to juice the economy, you want to get it into the hands of people who are going to spend it very quickly.
Okay, and that's all well and good, and I understand the logic of some of that, but here's the thing though, is that you're looking at a situation where when the government's doing that, for everybody like myself who got the first stimulus check and wasn't feeling any kind of a pinch from it, what do? We put it in the bank. There was an awful lot of savings on that first one there, and I think they've basically said that it didn't juice demand the way that they thought it would. It helped avert catastrophe in a lot of ways as far as for the people who really did need it. Things would have been even worse. And again, the fact that this was not a depression level thing that stayed a depression level thing. And I think it was basically that for at least a couple weeks there in March and in April. But the fact that we pulled out of it, I think, had to do with that. And that's where I think, again, that this is a thing where there probably is some more help that's needed. But it'll be interesting to see what happens here with how they go about that. And that's clearly going to be the big domestic initiative, I think, of the first term of this presidency.
Well, that and the vaccine distribution.
Yes, which the
Democrats, they exaggerate a little bit when they say there was no plan for distribution, but there wasn't a very good plan.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Yeah.
It was total amateur hour. I actually have an old high school friend whose husband is over at FEMA, Federal Emergency Management.
Yep.
And he was a career military, and then as a logistics guy, and then moved over into FEMA. And he was working there when Jared Kushner's little management consultant buddies dropped in, and it sounds like it was just constant head shaking of what are these idiots doing.
Well,
you're putting people in who have no idea how the systems work, and they kept telling the civil servants to do things that were illegal, and not because they were particularly malevolent. It's just they had no idea what they were doing.
All right, but here's the thing, though, and this is something that I read way back when, and so just, in fairness, and I'm not a big Jared Kushner guy, but I got the sense that it was from one of his little outside group that he had. That was, I understand that was where the concept of the Popup Hospitals came from. So if that was the case, give him credit for that.
The concept of Popup Hospitals came from MASH units in Korea.
Well,
I mean, anybody who watched MASH knows what a Popup hospital is.
Okay,
but they set those things up in disaster zones all the time.
But I mean, doing that in this country, we all watched MASH back in the day. For God's sakes, Colin. I mean, of course it existed on our TV screens.
I'm just saying that
but I mean,
I'm sure plenty of people with experience in disaster relief.
Converting major structures. I mean, whoever it was, my hat's off to him. Whoever it was that had the idea of converting major structures in a time of calamity, if it came from Jared Kushner's group, more power to him. Wherever it came from, I respect him because it was a hell of an idea. It kept things from getting worse, and it's been necessary. Hell, it was necessary into the fall in a lot of places. Utah, Wisconsin was using them. Last summer in Georgia, I mean, sadly enough, yeah. I mean, the whole handling of this thing has been pretty disgraceful all the way through. I'm willing to say that. And again, I think Biden benefits from the low bar on that as far as how that went. The whole thing again on the vaccine. Trump did nothing on the vaccine distribution. Where he can take credit is the bullying of you got to get something out ASAP, although if Trump had his way, they'd have cut corners and gotten out an unsafe one even quicker, I'm afraid. But,
I suspect, but we'll never know.
We'll never know. We'll never know. We can think that. But it's a thing where I think, the whole thing of Operation Warp Speed, that is, Trump deserves his share, in my estimation, of credit for that. Although, like I said, the infrastructure to back it up, it wasn't there. It was, let's just leave it in the hands of the states, and a lot of the states are run by buffoons, so you see what you get here. You have a Holocaust in New York from, nursing home patients getting pushed over a cliff into incinerators by Andrew Cuomo, essentially, so,
when he was getting lionized early in the pandemic, I was skeptical then. I've never been a big Cuomo fan.
Yeah.
And, I was not remotely surprised.
Honestly, if you lived in New York in 2018, you'd have been wearing one of those "I'm with Zephyr" buttons, wouldn't you?
No, not really. I don't trust academics.
Okay.
No, politics is a skill.
Yeah, exactly.
So, where I would, the thing that just never, talking about Trump's mishandling, and basically devolving responsibilities down to the states, simply having things like very clear rules or guidelines for businesses so that there was so much less uncertainty about how to reopen and when to reopen, right? There were probably plenty of businesses that closed down that didn't have to, or stay closed longer than they have to. A simple thing like a mask mandate, to cut transmission rates. I'm in East Texas, obviously, as I mentioned before, right now, and I'm just blown away at how few people and how many people who should know better are refusing to wear masks. People who are educated health professionals, for instance,
Yeah,
that clear guidance from the top could have made a huge difference and saved some lives and saved some jobs, too. It would have been a far better move politically.
Yeah, absolutely. Trump would have won the election, I think, if he took it seriously, because he came this close despite shooting himself in the foot all the way through. In my estimation, there's significant blood on his hands. Ironic, since he's the first president, not to do, military adventurism ad hoc willy-nilly in the Middle East in a long time, yet all the blood on his hands is domestic rather than foreign because of politicizing masks, pandering to the Peckerwoods who are like, God doesn't want me to wear a mask, dagnabbit, all that kind of crap. I mean, absolutely.
I just don't get it. It's not hard.
Well, and it
doesn't make you less of a man. He could have appealed to, there are different ideas of manhood, right? There's an old idea that men protect the weak, You know, you could have appealed to that kind of thing.
Colin, the thing of it is as an intellectually honest person on all of this kind of stuff, okay, is that I don't like when, when there's examples of stuff that y'all on the left are able to point to and whatever, of like, because it lives up to the worst caricature of what guys like me are all about.
I don't think anyone even had. I think this exceeds.
I mean, it does. It does.
But self-caricature.
But it goes, and like I said before, of where it's all just the tribalism, culture war crap, whatever, that doesn't even have anything to do with people's actual lives. And it's like, I don't like when guys you are able to point and be like, that's what the right wing's all about. I mean, because I got nothing, because people like me are in the minority and I know it. And that's a thing where it just pisses me off, because it's a poor reflection, and it's where, again, this entire divorce of basically politics and policy, and where policy is not really part of the culture war on the right. The problem, from my estimation, is that the policy is very much wedded to the culture angle on the left, and I think that's why you guys are going to be as effective as you're going to be in the next 4 years, because you guys know what you want, and you're going to go get it.
Excels at creating circular firing squads. Do not underestimate that.
Exactly.
I mean, it's the purity. What I fear on the left more than anything else is the purity police. I think that the Republicans take this idea of cancel culture way too far. But there is what makes it work is that there's a nugget of truth there.
Sure.
And I don't consider myself a leftist. I think of myself as a liberal.
Yeah.
Because I, like a 19th century liberal. I mean, hell, I own a business, right?
Sure.
Like a 19th century liberal. I want to maximize freedom, an individual person's ability.
Well, not economic freedom, Colin. You like every other kind.
Okay. Well, it's just, and I think that I was in college during the first wave of political correctness, and it was very unpleasant.
Me too.
So the benefit of this is, what a lot of what gets called politically correct is just not being rude to people, right?
Yeah.
Let's all be good to each other, but don't try to police opinions.
Right.
It really gets me, and I think that is the kind of thing that the right is going to be able to use, again, because there is a kernel of truth there.
Well, and that's the whole thing, too, is that, again, as somebody who is a Roman Catholic and has tried as much as possible to take that seriously. Now that leads me to some of my social views on politics and stuff like that, but on the whole human decency end as well. I've always been somebody very concerned about political correctness, and yet it's a whole thing of again, for any of the friends that I have who are different than the white male, whatever, I don't have any desire to offend them. I'd feel bad if I did. So it's but the thing of it is that there are a lot of people on the right, they're like, oh, what kind of a pussy are you? If you're not I don't want to offend any friends of mine. I'm not in favor of curbing people's freedoms, in any kind of a way that's un-American, but by the same token, can we be responsible with the freedoms that we have? And one of the big lessons, and that's the thing, and the last year has taught me this, that we're not responsible with the freedoms that we have. That's why a lot of people, I think, over the last year, in the face of this pandemic, have shown the selfishness that they have. And I'll even go right down to, Trump having the super spreader events that he did in the teeth of a pandemic leading up to it. And I have friends who went to those things. And I'm just are you kidding me? I mean, we are not a country where, again, I know folks on the left always like to act like they got the monopoly on caring about other people. But that's not something that is supposed to be on a partisan basis. And one of my biggest disappointments with the right, particularly in the Trump era, is the right, so many elements of it, willfully renouncing it and saying, we're not going to be people who give a crap about other people because that just makes us like people on the left.
Yeah, no, it's not very Christian, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. Draw a straight friggin' line between what you say you stand for and the other stuff here. So again, that's the thing, and for as much as I've called out all the stuff on your side that I see going on. I'm willing to call it out on my own as well, and it will be an interesting, first 2 years of the Biden term here. Again, I think we're going to be talking probably more about light than heat, as it were, with the Trump era, and more about actual policies and stuff. And Republicans are going to try and pivot to being responsible on policies after not much talking about it for 4 years. So
I don't know. I think that there's no incentive for them to do so. There's no, their audience is contracting, right?
Yeah.
And what you're left with is, a radicalized, shrinking minority. And so there's no incentive to talk policy. The only incentive is to just keep hammering on those same, cultural, tribal things that we've been talking about.
Yeah.
So that's what really concerns me, is that that there's no incentive for anyone, trying to be a leader on the right to do sensible things.
Sure.
Yeah,
well,
and if anything, my God, the stuff I've been reading the last few days, after the impeachment vote, it sounds like the local Republican officials are far more rabid than most people at the national level.
Well, yeah.
And that kind of thing is self-replicating, right? Because they're going to encourage other candidates who are just like that. And then, it basically, gerrymandering is a good example.
Yep.
And Republicans, obviously, all incumbents try to gerrymander to protect themselves.
Sure.
The Republicans have been far more ruthless about doing it to gain power.
Yeah.
In the last couple of decades, and we've talked about that at length before.
Yeah.
But the downside for the Republicans is that it creates so many districts where the only person who's going to get elected is a Jim Jordan.
Right.
And that is not healthy. It basically accelerates this spiral into, from an outsider's point of view, madness.
Well, and that's the whole thing, too. Is it like back in the day, that is something that would actually have appeal to me, because it would be like, okay, well, we're going to get the person who's the most hardcore on policy, but Jim Jordan doesn't give a crap about policy. He's a pure culture warrior. For a guy who was, Freedom Caucus this, Freedom Caucus that, it goes out the window the minute that Trump is in there, and it's all just nonstop sucking up to Trump. What the F is so Freedom Caucus about Donald Trump?
Right.
You wanted to act like the national.
I hear you.
The national debt.
Where is fiscal,
Yeah.
conservatism?
The national debt didn't stop mattering when Obama left office, but that's the whole thing here too. That essentially nobody's intellectually honest anymore, and that's where, again, the Republican Party, I think, is going to be hamstrung in trying to, put forth any kind of opposition here. Which, again, it just, to me, makes it all the more incumbent every night before everyone in America goes to sleep. They need to say a prayer for the continued health of Joe Manchin, the national hall monitor, to protect us all from AOC.
Well, I think again, the general views of Democratic voters are pretty mainstream. Actually, they are mainstream. So it's not just Manchin. The whole, the people, the real activists on the left are afraid that Biden is going to be far too timid in their eyes. So,
from the early returns,
the things that I'm going to be watching for are things like, can you fix Obama? Can you fix the problems that you haven't been able to fix in Obamacare? Right. I buy my health insurance through the exchanges, for example. So I'm very interested in this.
Yeah.
As a small business guy, and can you introduce a public option? Can you get rid of some of these insane bureaucratic things that keep people who are eligible for Medicaid from getting Medicaid? Can you use government investment to do things like it makes no sense that mail postal service Jeeps would be replaced by something that burns gas, right? It's going to be cheaper to buy electric.
Right.
The same thing, like I'm sure when UPS replaces its fleets, they'll go electric. I mean, those things don't do cross-country runs, right?
Right.
So it'll be cheaper and more efficient to replace them with electric ones when you can buy them in bulk. Those are the kind of things that I'm going to be watching. And then, obviously, we talked about the defense and national security stuff. It's just, you and I can agree that the military-industrial complex has so much inertia that, good luck anyone trying to change it.
Yeah, that's going to be a big challenge. And if Joe Biden is looking for a Nixon goes to China moment, then Joe Biden being the guy to tame the military-industrial complex might just be it.
Good luck.
Yes.
There's an online. It takes a lieutenant to put something on an aircraft design and a colonel to get it off of it.
Yeah.
Just everything gets larded up.
Yeah, it's going to be $600 hammers as far as the eye can see, I'm afraid. But we'll have to contend with that. But we
are about to land another critter on Mars.
We are.
Like, some things are going well.
Yeah, exactly. And Space Force is still on its way, I believe. So, the first version of it on Netflix was pretty good.
With a better name.
Yeah, it's going to have to go a long way to top the Netflix version because Steve Carell was pretty awesome, as was the entire cast. But we'll see how it goes, and as we go through this Biden era in which, again, we're going to be talking probably more about politics than personalities, but hey, that's the kind of stuff you and I kind of tend to prefer anyways. So, sinking our teeth into policies and stuff, at least there's that to look forward to. So I look forward to it with you as always, my friend.
Thanks, man. I've had a really good time tonight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yes, and we ended up getting too many episodes out of this one while we were at it. So
more grist for the social media mill.
Absolutely, more to be able to go out there and promote. Hang in there in Texas, Colin Delany. Thoughts and prayers to you and the fam down there. Colin Delany from the great epolitics.com. Check that out as always, everybody. And thank you, everybody, for joining us for these great mini episodes of the FDH Lounge.